I'm Elizabeth Spelke. I've spent most of my life studying babies. My real interests are in human minds and what some of the universal properties of our minds are that make us so different from other animals and yet so fundamentally able to learn and function under really different cultural circumstances depending on where we happen to be born. The scale-up problem is a really fundamental problem that all of us face. And I should say I'm not an economist or a public policy person. And so I haven't thought about those failures of scale-ups in terms of their implications for, what do we need to do differently in order to actually have policy effects in the world. But what I have tried to do all my life is study how children learn. And as I started for the first time in the last, eight years or so, to attempt to do research in the field with large samples of kids living under very different conditions and being studied by us under very different conditions from those that obtain in my lab, I really came to realize that even for basic research in developmental cognitive science, which is my field, even for that research, we need to solve the problem of figuring out how kids learn in the noisy, rich, variable environments in which that learning is actually taking place. For most of my life, I've attempted to figure out how children learn by doing very precisely controlled experiments in my laboratory, where we pluck infants out of the wild, or young children out of the wild, put them down for 20 minutes, and attempt in a very systematic way to probe what are they perceiving, what are they paying attention to, what are they learning from the events that we're showing to them. And I make no apologies for this research. I do think this is the best way of coming to understand what the fundamental mechanisms are that are available to children for learning. But what this work doesn't tell us is what they're actually learning in the wild. And when we bring kids in at different ages and chart how what they know has changed from one age to another, that's a good starting point. But what we really want to understand is what causes those changes. And for that, I think we need to go into the field. So I think the problem of scale up is a problem not only for economists and public policymakers, but for everybody who studies human psychology, even people who, like me, who've spent almost our entire lives doing that in our labs. The thing that I'm hoping all of these studies will give us, and here I feel that especially in the domain of education, where I'm mostly interacting with people, I see a lot of skepticism about this, is a stronger evidence-based approach to public policy questions, right? Now, not every public policy question can be settled by data, but I think a lot of them can. And I often feel as if questions where people just go back and forth and debates turn in circles, it would be so nice just to admit that there are different possible answers to the question that's being debated, and field research at scale can answer them. I think it's a way of diffusing, or at least de-escalating conflicts and arriving at better solutions to policy questions, better answers to policy questions. Here's a piece of what I hope you could accomplish. There's a whole field out there that goes beyond classic psychology. It tends to get called cognitive science or sometimes cognitive neuroscience, but the basic premise behind this field is that the human mind is arguably the most complicated entity on the planet. And it's too complicated for any one discipline on its own to have a monopoly on, on studies of it. It's really best approached through interdisciplinary research. And up until now, initially when cognitive science first started coming together as an enterprise back in the 1960s, the primary fields involved were in the social sciences. So, psychology, but also, sometimes it's humanities actually, linguistics, philosophy, anthropology, fields like that. What's happened over time is that big parts of neuroscience and other areas of biology, including evolutionary biology, have become engaged in the cognitive science enterprise, as have enterprises in mathematics and computer science, especially machine learning and artificial intelligence, but also big data analyses of broader sorts. And I think that this has been extremely useful in getting a deeper understanding of human nature, an understanding not only of what we learn, and not even only of how we learn, but of why we learn some things and not others. When computational cognitive scientists can show us in principle what the best answer to a problem is, how should a visual system be working if it's going to be effectively drawing the right conclusions about what's out there in the world from patterns of light at the camera or whatever, when you put these enterprises together, you get a deeper understanding of us. And this brings me back to the whole issue of scale, because I think that's the understanding we need in order to make good initial guesses as to what an ultimately successful, scalable program will look like, right? So I really think having that deeper understanding is really important. I also believe that field research where you look at cognition, both in adults and in children in the wild, is the best way of getting a causal understanding of a general causal understanding of our human minds. So one thing I would love to see is I would love to see economists and policymakers, if not actually signing on to the cognitive science agenda, at least coming to leverage some of the insights that we get from this broader interdisciplinary research enterprise as a guide to thinking about issues like scalability.